Hello everyone. So today we are going to learn about the short stories. The short story 2, A Respected Woman, written by Kate Chopin. So here, the writer has given 3 main characters, Mrs. Baroda, Mr. Gaston and Mr. Gouvernail. Mrs. Baroda being the main character, the respected woman. The story revolves around her, Mr. Gaston, her husband, and Mr. Gouvernail, Mr. Gaston's friend. So the story starts when Mr. Gaston says to Mr. Baroda that his friend is coming home. So यहाँ चाहिँ के हुन्छ भने Mrs. Baroda has been working through winter in sugar plantation. So Mrs. Baroda चाहिँ winter भरि काम गरिराख्नु भएको थियो in the plantation. Both of the husband and wife were working and she just wanted some peaceful time. अनि उलाई चाहिँ रेस्ट चाहिएको थियो Mrs. Barodaलाई, and she expected her husband to give her some peaceful time and just a talk with him. But Mr. Gaston invited his friend Mr. Gouvernail to his home. अब यहाँ चाहिँ with this decision, Mrs. Baroda was a bit dissatisfied and she didn't like it because उसलाई चाहिँ आफ्नो हस्बेन्डसँगको टाइम चाहिएको थियो, but he invited his friend. And talking about Mr. Gouvernail, Mrs. Baroda never met Mr. Gouvernail. She just heard about him. उसले Mr. Gaston को मुखबाट सुनेको थियो कि Mr. Gouvernail कस्तो हुन् भनेर. She imagined him to be a tall, slim, cynical man wearing glasses and all. But in reality, he was nothing like that. And Mrs. Baroda was a bit disappointed. After this, when Mr. Gouvernail came home when he was invited, Mrs. Baroda noticed that he was a silent, mute and receptive man, and he's been attentive to Mr. Gaston. So Mr. Gouvernail चाहिँ कस्तो थियो भने he was a nice guy, तर he was not that hospitable and ऊ चाहिँ silent treatment kind of दिँदै थियो, and he was attentive to Mr. Gaston. But Mr. Gouvernail also appreciated the way how Mr. Gaston and Mr. Baroda lived, and Mr. Gouvernail also appreciated their dogs, both of the dogs. After a time when everything happened, Mrs. Baroda was tired of having Mr. Gouvernail as a guest. She just wanted him to leave, and she also wanted to go back to her aunt out of the city so that she can just have some rest and some peaceful amount of time with herself, as she's been working hard, so she was very tired. One night she was sitting alone on a bench under an oak tree. She was just normally sitting and she saw a man coming from the bushes, जुन कि Mr. Gouvernail थियो, and he just came and sat beside her. When he came and sat beside her, he gave her a red scarf, and Mr. Gouvernail said that it was sent by Mr. Gaston, the red scarf. So Mrs. Baroda took it and she just kept it on her lap, and she was just sitting. त्यसपछि चाहिँ Mr. Gouvernail started talking to Mrs. Baroda, and he was very frank while he was talking about his college days. So ऊ चाहिँ आफ्नो कलेजको जति पनि टाइम थियो Mr. Gastonसँग स्पेन्ड गरेको, he was talking about that and he was telling her the stories. यो सबै कुरा भन्दै थियो, and she was listening, but she wanted to reach out to him and she wanted to be more closer to him, and she drew closer to him, but then she realized that she was a respectable woman and she was married to Mr. Gaston and Mr. Gouvernail was his friend. So she stepped back, and after that, when she went back home, she wanted to tell her husband, उसलाई चाहिँ भन्नु थियो Mr. Gastonलाई that she was tempted by his friend and she kind of started liking him. तर फेरि Mrs. Baroda realized कि there are few battles which should be fought alone, and that shows that she had that inner conflict within herself, and she was confused and she didn't know what to do. So after this, the next morning, she left home for the city and she went to his aunt. But to the surprise, when she came back, Mr. Gaston again said, Mr. Gaston thought कि like अब फेरि Mr. Gouvernail लाई invite गर्यो भने Mrs. Baroda will not like it because she had a different image of him, and earlier Mrs. Baroda ले जस्तो आफ्नो husband लाई भनेको थियो that she didn't like him. Mr. Gouvernail was mute and he was deceptive, so she didn't wanted him as a guest. But to his surprise, when Mrs. Baroda came back home, she had a different image of Mr. Gouvernail, and now उसलाई चाहिँ कुनै प्रब्लम थिएन Mr. Gouvernailसँग, and even she told her husband that you can call him back, you can invite him because he's a nice person. And then Mrs. Baroda was okay having him in his house. And that's all for the video. Thank you.